You want to know who someone truly is. Do not listen too closely to what they say about themselves. Words are easy to rehearse. Images can be carefully maintained. What reveals a human being is far more subtle and far more honest. True character shows itself not in moments of comfort, but at the edges of life, where control weakens and the unconscious speaks. Desire reveals the structure of the inner world. When life frustrates someone, when plans collapse, when recognition is denied, when power is lost, what emerges is not accidental. It is the material that has always been there, waiting for resistance to bring it to the surface. A person who has made peace with their inner contradictions may feel disappointment, even anger, but they do not collapse into bitterness or cruelty. Their frustration becomes reflective rather than destructive, but observe those who react with excessive rage, manipulation, or silent resentment. In such moments the mask cracks. You are not witnessing the situation, you are witnessing unresolved inner conflicts demanding expression. What they blame on others is often what they cannot tolerate within themselves. Life has simply removed the stage lights, and the true actor has stepped forward. Pay close attention not to the emotion itself, emotion is human, but to what the emotion tries to justify. Does it seek responsibility, or does it seek an enemy? Character is revealed in whether frustration deepens awareness or hardens defenses. The second thing is how a person treats those from whom they gain nothing. Power distorts perception. When someone interacts with those who cannot offer status, advantage, or validation, the unconscious no longer needs to perform. Courtesy shown upward but absent downward is not courtesy at all, it is strategy. Genuine respect does not fluctuate with usefulness. Watch carefully how someone speaks to people who cannot advance their goals, the ignored, the invisible, the inconvenient. Here, character expresses itself quietly. A person who has integrated their sense of worth does not need to diminish others to feel whole. They do not require an audience to behave ethically. Their decency is not transactional. This does not mean perfection. Everyone has moments of impatience or fatigue, but there is a difference between momentary weakness and a consistent pattern. Patterns belong to character. They are the grooves carved by years of inner choices. These two observations, response to frustration and treatment of the powerless, work because they bypass conscious self-image. Most people identify with who they believe they are, not with who they repeatedly become. The psyche, however, reveals itself through repetition, not intention. When you understand this, judgment gives way to clarity. You no longer argue with appearances, you simply observe, and this observation is not meant to condemn but to understand both others and yourself. For the same mirror applies inward. True character is not a moral label, it is a psychological reality. It is the relationship between the conscious story we tell and the unconscious forces that move us. Integration occurs when these two no longer wage war against each other, so if you wish to see clearly, simplify your vision. Watch what happens when desire is blocked. Watch how dignity is offered where no benefit exists. In these quiet, revealing moments, the soul speaks without words, and it never lies. True character is not something that appears when life is smooth, predictable, and accommodating. Comfort allows the personality to remain polished, rehearsed, and socially acceptable. In such moments, most people are able to appear kind, reasonable, and controlled. But comfort is a stage designed to support the mask. It asks very little from the inner life and therefore reveals very little in return. What we call character under ease is often nothing more than habit reinforced by favorable conditions. Frustration, however, strips away teeth. ESE supports. When expectations are blocked, when desires are denied, and when control is threatened, the psyche is forced to respond without preparation. In these moments, the deeper layers of the personality rise to the surface. The reaction is rarely chosen, it emerges. This emergence is not accidental. It is shaped by long-standing inner patterns, unresolved conflicts, and unexamined beliefs that have been operating silently beneath awareness. When a person encounters frustration, the ego experiences a wound. The image they hold of themselves or of how life should respond to them is challenged. What follows reveals how integrated that person truly is. Some individuals experience frustration as an invitation to reflect. They feel discomfort, but they remain capable of curiosity. They ask what the situation is revealing about their expectations, their limits, or their unacknowledged dependencies. In such cases, frustration deepens consciousness rather than narrowing it. Others experience frustration as an intolerable threat. Instead of reflection, they move toward projection. Anger is redirected outward, blame is assigned, and responsibility is avoided. The problem is never internal, it must always belong to someone else. This reaction exposes a fragile inner structure that relies on external validation to remain stable. The intensity of the response is often proportional not to the situation itself, but to the insecurity it touches within. What is important to observe is not the presence of emotion, but the direction it takes. Frustration naturally produces tension. Character is revealed in whether that tension becomes insight or hostility, growth or rigidity. A person who has developed inner responsibility may still feel anger, but they do not surrender agency to it. They remain aware that their reaction belongs to them, not to the circumstance alone. Frustration also exposes one's relationship with power and control. Those who are inwardly secure can tolerate limitation without humiliation. They recognize that not every desire deserves fulfillment, and not every obstacle is an injustice. Those who are inwardly divided often interpret frustration as disrespect. Their sense of self depends on constant confirmation, and resistance feels like an attack on identity itself. Over time, repeated responses to frustration form a pattern. This pattern is far more revealing than any declared belief or moral statement. A person may speak eloquently about patience, kindness, or strength, yet consistently respond to frustration with cruelty, withdrawal, or manipulation. In such cases, the unconscious behavior carries more truth than the conscious narrative. Frustration does not create character, it reveals it. It brings into the light what has long been operating in the dark. To understand someone deeply, one must watch them not when life agrees with them, but when it refuses them. In that refusal, the inner structure becomes visible, and the reality beneath the personality quietly announces itself. How a person reacts to not getting what they want reveals far more than the desire itself. Wanting is universal, frustration is inevitable. But the psychological meaning of frustration lies in the reaction it provokes. When a desire is blocked, something deeper than disappointment is activated. The ego encounters a boundary, and in that collision, inner conflict becomes visible. What emerges in that moment is not carefully chosen behavior, but a spontaneous expression of unresolved inner tensions. Desire often carries hidden expectations. People do not merely want outcomes, they want confirmation of their self-image, their value, or their sense of control. When these expectations are denied, the reaction exposes what the person unconsciously depends on to feel whole. For some, not getting what they want triggers reflection and adjustment. They feel the discomfort, but they are able to question their assumptions and recalibrate their desires. This indicates an inner alignment where conscious intention and unconscious needs are not in constant opposition. For others, denial activates disproportionate reactions. Anger, resentment, victimhood, or manipulation appear almost automatically. These reactions suggest that the desire was never just a preference, it was a psychological necessity. When life refuses such a demand, the psyche responds as if something essential has been taken away. This intensity points to inner conflict between who the person believes they are and what they unconsciously fear becoming if the desire is not fulfilled. Inner conflict arises when parts of the psyche remain unintegrated. A person may consciously value patience and humility, yet unconsciously crave dominance or admiration. When reality obstructs these unconscious cravings, tension builds. The reaction to not getting what one wants often becomes a defense mechanism designed to protect the ego from confronting this contradiction. Blame is projected outward, circumstances are labeled unfair, and others are cast as obstacles rather than mirrors. The manner in which frustration is expressed also reveals how a person relates to responsibility. Some individuals recognize their reaction as their own, even when the situation is painful. They may feel anger or sadness, but they do not lose awareness of their role in the emotional response. This capacity reflects a level of inner coherence. The conflict still exists, but it is observed rather than acted out. Others externalize the conflict entirely. Their emotional state becomes someone else's fault, and their behavior is justified by the situation. In such cases, the inner struggle remains unconscious, repeated again and again through similar reactions. The person believes they are responding to the world, while in reality they are reenacting unresolved internal dynamics. Repeated reactions to denial create patterns that shape relationships and life trajectories. A person who consistently collapses, explodes, or manipulates when denied reveals a psyche governed by unmet inner needs. These needs often originate long before the present situation, rooted in earlier experiences where wanting and survival became intertwined. The present frustration merely reactivates an old emotional script. The key insight is that frustration does not introduce conflict, it uncovers it. Not getting what one wants removes the illusion of harmony between conscious intention and unconscious demand. In that exposure, the psyche speaks honestly. The reaction, whether quiet or dramatic, shows where the person is divided within themselves and how far they have yet to go toward inner integration. Emotion is a natural and unavoidable part of human experience. Feelings arise before thought, often without invitation, and they carry vital information about our inner state. Anger, sadness, fear, and disappointment are not signs of weakness or failure. They are signals that something meaningful has been touched. To feel intensely is not a psychological flaw. What reveals deeper psychology is not the presence of emotion itself, but what a person does with it once it appears. When emotion arises, there is a moment of choice, though it is often unconscious. One path leads inward toward reflection and responsibility. The other moves outward toward blame and justification. This divergence exposes the inner structure of the psyche. A person who can allow emotion without immediately explaining it away or assigning it to an external cause shows a capacity for inner containment. They recognize that emotion belongs to them, even if it was triggered by something outside. Blame enters when emotion becomes intolerable to hold. Instead of being experienced as a message from within, it is treated as an accusation against the world. Someone else must be responsible for how I feel. Something external must be corrected for the discomfort to disappear. This movement outward protects the ego from self-examination. By locating the problem entirely outside, the individual avoids confronting inner contradictions, unmet needs, or unrealistic expectations. Justification often follows blame. The emotional reaction is not merely explained but defended. The person constructs a narrative in which their response becomes not only understandable but necessary. Anger becomes righteousness, withdrawal becomes self-respect, and cruelty becomes honesty. These justifications are not deliberate lies. They are unconscious strategies designed to preserve a coherent self-image. To question the reaction would threaten the identity built around it. The deeper psychology revealed here lies in how the individual relates to responsibility. When someone consistently blames others for their emotional state, it suggests a split between experience and ownership. The emotion is felt, but not integrated. It remains something that happens to them, rather than something that arises within them. Over time, this pattern hardens into a worldview where life is perceived as hostile and people are experienced as obstacles. In contrast, a person who can feel emotion without immediate blame allows the feeling to unfold. They may still express it, but without the urgency to make someone else the cause of their inner state. This does not mean passive acceptance or self-suppression. It means recognizing that while events trigger emotions, they do not fully explain them. The intensity of a reaction often belongs as much to past unresolved material as to the present moment. Justification also reveals fear of vulnerability. To admit uncertainty, hurt, or confusion requires inner strength. Blame replaces vulnerability with certainty. It offers clarity at the cost of truth. The psyche prefers a false sense of control over the discomfort of ambiguity, and justification becomes the tool by which this control is maintained. Over time, patterns of blame and justification reveal more about a person than any emotional outburst. Emotion passes, the structure that manages it remains. Where blame is automatic and justification rigid, deeper conflicts remain unconscious and unresolved. Where emotion is allowed without immediate defense, psychological growth becomes possible, and the inner world slowly moves toward integration. The way a person treats those who offer no advantage reveals layers of the psyche that rarely appear in situations of exchange or reward. When benefit, recognition, or power is present, behavior is often shaped by calculation. Courtesy, generosity, and morality can easily become strategies rather than expressions of inner values. True authenticity appears only when there is nothing to gain, when no audience is watching, and when no future favor is expected. Human beings naturally adapt their behavior to social hierarchies. This adaptation, however, becomes psychologically revealing when respect flows only upward. When kindness is reserved for those with status, influence, or usefulness, it suggests that worth is measured externally. In such a psyche, value is not inherent but assigned, and human dignity becomes conditional. This condition exposes an inner dependence on validation and power rather than an integrated sense of self. Those who possess inner security do not need others to serve a function in order to be treated well. Their behavior remains relatively consistent across social boundaries because it is not driven by gain. They do not require superiority to feel whole. When interacting with those who cannot offer advantage, their conduct remains grounded, not because they are morally performing, but because their values are internalized. Respect becomes an expression of inner order rather than a transaction. The absence of advantage removes psychological incentives and reveals unconscious attitudes. How someone speaks to service workers, subordinates, or strangers who will soon disappear from their life shows how they relate to power and vulnerability. Disrespect in these moments often reflects a disowned sense of inferiority within the self. By diminishing others, the individual attempts to elevate their own fragile position. What appears as arrogance is often a defense against inner uncertainty. There is also a revealing difference between politeness and genuine regard. Politeness can be learned, mimicked, and strategically deployed. Genuine regard emerges spontaneously and does not fluctuate with circumstance. When someone extends patience or understanding to those who inconvenience them, it suggests an ability to tolerate frustration without asserting dominance. This tolerance reflects an inner balance where control is not required to maintain self-worth. Treatment of the powerless also reveals how a person understands equality. Some people believe equality is theoretical, applied only in ideal conditions. Others live it instinctively, even when there is no external pressure to do so. This instinct does not come from ideology but from psychological integration. When a person has reconciled their own strengths and weaknesses, they no longer need to rank themselves against others. Over time, these small, unobserved interactions form a consistent pattern. Patterns do not lie. A person may articulate noble principles, but their everyday behavior toward those who cannot reciprocate tells a truer story. Authentic values are not proclaimed. They are enacted in ordinary moments where choice exists but reward does not. In these moments, the unconscious speaks clearly. Without advantage to pursue or image to protect, behavior aligns within a structure. What is revealed is not who a person wants to be seen as, but who they are when nothing is at stake. Respect that depends on status or utility is not a true expression of regard, but a calculated response shaped by advantage. When respect rises and falls according to power, wealth, influence, or usefulness, it is no longer rooted in recognition of the human being, but in what that human being represents or provides. Such respect is conditional, and conditions always reveal insecurity rather than integrity. Genuine respect does not require evaluation. It does not ask what someone can offer in return, nor does it change when circumstances shift. When respect is tied to status, it becomes performative. The individual behaves appropriately not because they recognize inherent worth, but because they anticipate reward or fear consequence. This form of respect collapses the moment authority disappears or usefulness ends, exposing its hollow foundation. Psychologically, conditional respect reveals an unresolved relationship with power. Those who distribute respect according to hierarchy often identify too closely with external markers of value. They see themselves through comparison and ranking, measuring worth in terms of position rather than character. As a result, they unconsciously divide the world into those who deserve regard and those who do not. This division protects the ego by creating a sense of superiority, but it fragments the inner world. When someone is respectful only toward those above them, their behavior is driven by self-preservation rather than principle. When they are dismissive or indifferent toward those below, it reveals a need to assert dominance to stabilize their own sense of worth. This oscillation between submission and superiority points to an inner imbalance where self-respect has not yet been fully established. Without inner grounding, respect becomes a tool rather than a value. Utility-based respect follows a similar pattern. When people are valued only for what they can provide, relationships become transactional. Once usefulness fades, so does consideration. This approach reduces human connection to function, eroding empathy and trust. Over time, such a mindset isolates the individual. as relationships built on utility cannot withstand vulnerability, aging, or change. In contrast, genuine respect emerges from psychological integration. When a person has accepted both their strengths and limitations, they no longer need to rank others to feel secure. They can acknowledge difference without devaluation. Respect becomes stable because it is not threatened by another's success or diminished by another's weakness. It is extended freely, not strategically. This form of respect is quiet and consistent. It appears in tone, attention, patience, especially in situations where no benefit exists. It does not announce itself or seek recognition. It is present because the individual recognizes a shared human reality that transcends roles and functions. When respect depends on status or utility, it reveals more about the one offering it than the one receiving it. It shows where worth is externally sourced and where inner authority is lacking. True respect, however, arises when value is recognized as inherent, not earned, and when dignity is not something granted selectively but something acknowledged universally. The observations we use to understand others often feel safer when directed outward. Watching how people react under pressure, how they treat those with no advantage, or how they justify their emotions gives us a sense of clarity and distance. Yet the true psychological value of these observations emerges only when they are turned inward. Without self-application, insight becomes judgment. With self-application, it becomes awareness. It is easy to notice when someone else reacts defensively to frustration. Their anger, blame, or withdrawal stands out clearly because we are not emotionally entangled in their inner conflict. But when the same patterns appear within us, they are quickly rationalized or hidden behind explanations. The mind becomes skilled at protecting its self-image. Applying the same observations inward requires humility, because it threatens the story we tell about who we are. Self-awareness begins when we observe ourselves with the same honesty we apply to others. When a desire is blocked, do we become rigid or reflective? When recognition is absent, do we withdraw or grow resentful? These moments reveal our inner dependencies. If our sense of worth collapses under frustration, it suggests that our identity is still tied to outcomes rather than inner stability. This realization can be uncomfortable, but it is necessary for psychological growth. The inward application of observation also exposes how we relate to power and usefulness. We may criticize others for being respectful only when it benefits them, yet fail to notice when our own kindness diminishes in the absence of reward. Small interactions, especially when no one is watching, provide honest feedback about our values. The psyche reveals itself not through intention but through repetition. Emotional reactions offer another mirror. We may easily label someone else as reactive or defensive, but when strong emotion arises within us, we often rush to justify it. The question is not whether the emotion is valid, but whether we are willing to see what it is protecting. When blame appears, it often signals an inner conflict we are avoiding. Turning observation inward allows us to ask what expectation has been violated and why it holds such power over us. Self-awareness is not self-condemnation. The purpose of inward observation is not to judge, but to integrate. When we notice our own patterns without immediate defense, the psyche begins to loosen its grip on them. What was once acted out unconsciously can be held consciously. In this space, choice becomes possible. Applying these observations inward also dissolves moral superiority. As we recognize the same mechanisms operating within ourselves, compassion naturally arises. We see that human behavior is shaped less by malice and more by unexamined inner dynamics. This understanding does not excuse harmful behavior, but it deepens insight into its origins. True self-awareness is demanding because it removes the comfort of projection. It asks us to become responsible for our inner life rather than managing appearances. Yet this responsibility is also liberating. By observing ourselves with the same clarity we use to understand others, we move closer to inner coherence. The divided parts of the psyche begin to communicate, and what was once hidden in reaction gradually transforms into understanding. So if you truly wish to understand character, do not search for dramatic revelations or flawless behavior. Watch the quiet moments where desire is denied, where emotion rises, where no reward is offered, and where no audience is present. And then, with the same honesty, turn that gaze inward. What you discover is not meant to condemn you, but to awaken you. Character is not something we declare, it is something we repeatedly reveal, first to ourselves and then to the world. When observation replaces judgment and responsibility replaces blame, self-awareness deepens, and from that depth, a more conscious and integrated life begins.